Welcome back. In chapter 4, Pope Francis reminds us that being a disciple of Jesus means that we can't just be like everyone else. That if we take the gospel seriously, then there is a social dimension to the proclamation of the gospel. And that we, as disciples of Jesus, must have different values. For Pope Francis, one of the central issues is the inclusion of the poor in society. This is central to the message of the gospel. He reminds us that evangelization is the task of the entire church. The church is the agent of evangelization. We are a pilgrim people. We are moving in time and space. And we are confronted with new challenges and new realities, and we have to embrace these. When St. Paul, who was in many ways an independent apostle, goes up to Jerusalem to get the approval of the other apostles, what he wants to know is, am I wasting my time? Is what I'm doing, what I'm saying, running, or have I run in vain? And the apostles say to him, tell us what you're preaching. He tells them. That's okay. Do not forget the poor. That's what the apostles remind them. And Paul says, oh, my heart leapt, because I've never forgotten the poor. The poor have been central to the message. This important principle that the Pauline communities shouldn't just be about praise and worship, shouldn't just be self-centered, basically just Christian pagans. Pope Francis says this is a timely reminder for us today when we have this new self-centered paganism growing. We must include the poor. The primary recipients of the good news are the poor. The poor have a special place in the heart of God, who himself became poor. And the entire history of salvation, the entire history of redemption, is marked by the presence of the Saviour to the poor. Salvation comes to us because a poor maiden said yes. A poor young woman in a small town on the fringe of the empire, fringe of a great empire, a marginalized person said yes. And Mary's word of yes starts the history of salvation. Our Saviour was born in a manger, in the midst of animals. A child like many other poor families. When he was taken to the temple by Joseph and Mary, they offered 2 turtle doves in sacrifice. This was the offering that the poor made. They didn't have enough money for a lamb. He was raised in a poor household. He was a worker who worked and earned his daily bread by the sweat of his labour. When he began to preach about the kingdom, he stood up in the synagogue and Jesus said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor." He assured those who were crushed by sorrow and poverty that they had a special place in God's heart. Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He made himself one of them. When we are judged, we will be judged on a simple criteria with simple questions. When I was hungry, when I was thirsty, when I was naked, when I was sick, when I was a stranger, when I was in prison, what did you do for me? Jesus tells us that this is how we will be judged. How we treat him. How we treat him in the poorest of our brothers and sisters. In a later apostolic exhortation, Rejoice and Be Glad, on the call to holiness, Pope Francis talks about this text of Matthew, the final judgment. And he reminds us that it's not a simple invitation to charity. Rather, it is about Christology, the theology of Christ. And it sheds a mystery on Christ. We are called to recognize Christ in the poor and the suffering. This is how we know that we are not running in vain, that we're not wasting our time, that our faith is concrete and has value in how we treat the poor. Pope Francis has a whole section on his philosophy, and it's quite interesting and enchanting in many ways. Pope Francis reminds us that we are called to be bearers of peace, and that peace is not the absence of calm. Peace is not making a scene. Peace is not keeping quiet in the face of evil. Peace is not even no war. Peace is the gift of the Spirit. Peace is the presence of Christ. And we've all heard the phrase, prevention is better than cure. And Frederick Douglass, an ex-slave in the United States of America, says it's easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men. This progress towards building peace is central to Pope Francis's thinking. It is the journey and not necessarily the destination which is important. We are called to build progress and systems that create peace, justice, and fraternity. And to do this, we have to have an understanding of what it is we are trying to do. He tells us that church social doctrine serves as a primary and fundamental reference for interpreting and evaluating social phenomena. And he says he wants to set forth 4 specific principles that can help us to develop this progress of life in society and a way of building up which takes the whole human person and the whole of society and gives them a share in this progress. And his 4 ideas are: time is greater than space, unity prevails over conflict, realities are more important than ideas, and the whole is greater than the parts. Time is greater than space. The journey, the process in getting there, is more important than the destination. There will never be a situation where we have built peace, where we live in a perfect, just society. We will always be striving to build this. And what we should be concentrating on is the process that brings us to this. We have to give priority to actions which generate new processes in society and engage peoples who can develop them to the point where they bear fruit in significant historical events. One of the examples he gives us is the story of the wheat and the weeds. A man goes out and sows wheat, and an enemy goes out and sows darnel. And they both grow together. And only at the end does the man choose the wheat over the darnel. Both grow side by side. And if he tries to uproot the evil, the darnel, it will destroy the wheat. It is the Lord of the harvest who will make the decision when to destroy the darnel. And they both grow. His second philosophical idea is unity prevails over conflict. Solidarity in diversity. Our lives are full of conflicts. There are a variety of ways of dealing with conflict. One is to just walk away. Wash your hands, pretend it doesn't happen. Another is to embrace it in such a way that we become a prisoner to it. And the third way is to deal with the conflict. It is a willingness to deal with it head on, to resolve it, and to make it a link in the chain of a new process. For Pope Francis, the Beatitudes, of course, are very important. The Beatitudes are not just about wishful thinking. Blessed are the peacemakers, Jesus tells us. What he doesn't say is, blessed are those who pray for peace. Blessed are those who think peace is a good idea. Blessed are those who hope for peace. Rather, blessed are those who make peace. And this radical understanding to our commitment to proclaim the gospel, to live the gospel, means that when we are faced with conflict, we embrace it. We embrace it in such a way as to bring peace. His third idea is realities are more important than ideas. He reminds us we must always remember that our faith is concrete. It's not wishy-washy. It's not an idea. The Word became flesh. Not an idea, but a person. This is how concrete our faith is. There exists tension between ideas and realities. How do we make concrete our good ideas? Remember, of course, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But we have to look at how these principles come into play. Realities are more important than ideas. We are confronting the world and the problems of the world as they are, not as we would like them to be. And we must bring always the love of Christ to this. Ideas which are disconnected from reality give rise to ineffectual forms of idealism. What we are called to do is to illuminate these ideas with reason. We are called to look at our world, to discern where God is, and to engage where God is. Lastly, Pope Francis says, the whole is greater than the parts. And this, I think, is enchanting. He says our model is not a sphere, because in a sphere, all parts are equidistant from the centre, and there's no difference. He says our model is a polyhedron. And a polyhedron is a shape where all the parts are different. That there is a place in the polyhedron of the church for everyone. There is a place for the poor and their culture, for their aspirations and their potential. Even people who we consider dubious on account of their faults and their failings have something to offer. In this polyhedral church, we are not all the same. We are all different. We are all unique, but we all come together to form one body. And he says it's the convergence of peoples who are a universal order. And we maintain our individuality, but we submerge it for the greater good, for the common good. For Pope Francis, to build peace, we have to engage in dialogue. And dialogue is central. Dialogue is not keeping calm or keeping quiet, or having no disagreements or no arguments. Dialogue is about respect. And he says there are whole fields where as Christians we have to engage in dialogue. Science, reason. Faith is not scared of science and reason. On the contrary, he reminds us the light of reason and the light of faith both come from God. And God cannot contradict himself. We who are evangelizers must be attentive to scientific advances. And we must help them to remember that the whole goal of life, the whole goal of study, the whole goal of science is to remember the supreme value of the human person at every stage of life. All of society can be enriched thanks to this dialogue. Not about the existence of an idea, but the centrality of the supreme value of human persons. The church does not wish to hold back the marvelous progress of science. On the contrary, she rejoices and delights in acknowledging the enormous potential that God has given to the human mind. Whether the science rigorously focused on the field of inquiry arrive at a conclusion which reason cannot refute, faith does not contradict it. But we are also called not just to engage science, but to engage with our fellow Christian brothers and sisters. May they all be one, Jesus prayed. And that is what we are called to be, one. We must bear in mind that our separated brothers are our brothers. And that is the most important thing. They are our brothers and sisters. Signs of division between our brothers and sisters in other countries can often exacerbate violence, can often add to causes of further conflict, which cannot be the will of Jesus. We have to be the leaven of peace. We are called to be one. We Catholics can learn from our brothers and sisters, especially about the meaning of episcopal collegiality, how the bishops work together and operate together, and also the experience of synods, which is important to us. We must dialogue with Judaism. Abraham is our father in faith, and we hold the Jewish people in special regard because God made the first covenant with them, and this covenant has not been revoked. God continues to bless them and to bring forth treasures of wisdom which flow from their encounter with his word. We must also remember that there are other people of faith, not faith in the God of Jesus Christ, but nonetheless faith. And we have to have an attitude of openness to their search for truth and their love. This dialogue is a place of conversation about human existence. Or as the bishops in India said, being open to them, sharing with them their joys and their sorrows. In this way we learn to accept others and their different ways of living. We can then join one another in taking up our duty of serving justice and peace, which should be a basic principle of all our exchanges. This dialogue, which has as its goal social peace and justice, is a way of bringing us and them closer together. True openness in remaining steadfast to one's deepest convictions and being open to understand those of another party. Islam. Dialogue with Islam. We profess and hold the faith of Abraham. And together with Muslims, we adore the one merciful God who will judge humanity on the final days. The sacred writings of Islam have retained some Christian ideas. Jesus and Mary received profound veneration and are greatly admired by Muslims. Many Muslims have a deep conviction that their life in its entirety is from God and for God. They also acknowledge that they need to respond to God and His ethical commands, and they have to treat with mercy those most in need. He says we Christians must embrace with affection and respect our Muslim immigrants in our countries. And in the same way, we have to ask to be received and respected in Islamic countries, countries of strong Islamic traditions. Pope Francis says, I ask and I humbly entreat these countries to grant Christians freedom to worship and to practice our faith in the light of the freedom which the followers of Islam enjoy in Western countries. A healthy pluralism which genuinely respects differences and values them does not entail privatizing religion in an attempt to reduce them to quiet obscurity or to the individual's conscience, or to relegate them to the enclosed precincts of churches, synagogues, temples, mosques. This, he says, would represent a new form of discrimination and authoritarianism. The respect due to agnostic or non-believing minority should not be arbitrarily imposed in a way that silences the conviction of believers or ignores the wealth of religious traditions, because this would just feed resentment, intolerance, and not bring peace. As believers, we feel close to those who do not consider themselves part of any religious tradition, yet sincerely seek the truth. We consider them as precious allies in their commitment to defending human dignity, in building peaceful coexistence between peoples, and in protecting creation. For Pope Francis, we engage in dialogue to be with our brothers and sisters, to work upon the centrality of the importance of the human person at all stages in their life and in their development. With all people, we strive together for peace and justice.